Hello there, listeners. This is Edgar Chaput, one of the co-hosts of the James Bond Complex. Well, we have a very special treat for you. Not just the James Bond Complex, but James Bond Canada as well, and our good buddy Jeff Wybo from over there. Essentially, this is the video production, at long last, of our 2019 Montreal ComicCon presentation. So what you're going to see here on James Bond Canada's channel and their platforms is part one of the presentation. So we hope you enjoy. We've been working on this very, very long and hard. We're quite proud of it. Blood, sweat, and tears. That's what went into these things. So we hope you enjoy. Thank you so much. And you'll find out where part two is going to be at pretty soon. Ciao. Toujours un plaisir. À la prochaine. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, on this fine Sunday morning, July 7th, 2019. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Hope you enjoyed your brunch. We're here for a very special panel called Four Faces.
4 decades.
1/007.
Oh, very well played. So essentially, obviously, we're very big James Bond fans. We hope you are James Bond fans as well. Long-standing franchise, very successful, 50 plus years. Everybody loves it. Everything's great. It's perfect. Well, funnily enough, throughout the franchise, there are several movies that have maybe hit, not snags, but controversies. Funnily enough, there are 4 films celebrating anniversaries this year in 2019. Next slide, please. So we have, in 1969, On Her Majesty's Secret Service was released. Has anybody seen that movie? Oh, yeah. Oh, we're pretty good, actually. Wonderful. 1979, a very, very special movie, Moonraker. How about that one? Well, we have a pretty good crowd here. 1989, ooh, License to Kill.
You guys are cheating.
Yeah, this is... And finally, 20 years ago, 1999's The World Is Not Enough. Oh, actually, okay, wonderful, wonderful, excellent. We're with the good people here this morning. So essentially, each one of these films is notorious for one reason or another. And what we're going to do, through chronological order of their release, we're going to discuss the controversies and maybe spin them back way around to into positivity, essentially. So we're going to start with On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Oh, by the way, we didn't even introduce ourselves. Why don't we do that? I'm Edgar, one of the co-hosts of the James Bond Complex.
I'm Matt. I'm the other co-host of the James Bond Complex.
What's up, guys? Jeff Wybo, James Bond Canada, and I'm from Ontario. Sorry.
We forgive you. We still like you. So, Jeff, I know you're a pretty big Majesty's fan. I do like it, although it's funny. That one's usually criticized because it's the only movie starring the other fella. What's his name again?
George Lazenby, the Australian. So, yes, today, guys, it's all about the controversies a bit. And George's controversy is he was not an actor, and he became James Bond. And you got to go back to 1962, and we all know Sean Connery was the first official James Bond in Dr. No. Well, while Sean Connery was playing James Bond in this movie, George Lazenby was in Australia, and he was taking a girl to the movie called Dr. No, and he thought he had a good chance going in, and going out he had a horrible chance with this girl because James Bond was getting all the girls in this movie and saving the world, and George Lazenby wanted to be James Bond. But then you got to fast forward a bit. 1967, You Only Live Twice is wrapping up, and Connery, through a bunch of stuff with the producers, decides to back out of the James Bond role. So then the producers go on this worldwide manhunt for the next James Bond. The producers thought Sean Connery isn't necessarily James Bond. James Bond is bigger than any actor, so they go looking for the next Bond. And so there's a girl named Maggie Abbott, and she's friends of George Lazenby, and she says, George, there's a perfect movie you got to go audition for. So George goes down, and they throw him out right away because he was just a male model, and he gets on the phone with Maggie Abbott and says, they wouldn't even let me audition. And she said, no, George, you have to go and get into the audition. He's like, oh, okay. So, what does he do? And he's not an actor. He's just one of us. He's like any one of you guys out here. So he goes and he gets Sean Connery's suit, a spare suit from Anthony Sinclair, and he puts it on. And then he goes to Sean Connery's barber and he gets Sean Connery's haircut. And he gets Sean Connery's, or a version of a Rolex. And he goes down and there's the casting department. If you guys can picture a bunch of little James Bonds sitting there trying to audition for the role of James Bond. They're all probably dressed like Sean Connery and stuff, but not as well as George. And he sees like a girl like drop a pencil, like the little secretary, and he sneaks past her and he shows up and there's like an executive producer who's on the phone and he sits there. He leans up against the office and he says, "I hear you're looking for the next James Bond." And now maybe out of panic because this executive producer couldn't find a Bond, he was talking to Harry Saltzman, who was the James Bond producer, on the phone at the time. And maybe he's like, "I think I got somebody for you." So George, they said, like, "Where have you filmed before?" And he started naming all these places that they would never be able to check because they didn't have like Google back then, obviously. And so he started saying like, "Oh, Hong Kong, this place." And like, "Oh, wow, that sounds good." And so he's like lying or spying his way into this role. And they make George do horseback riding, swimming lessons, fight scenes. They even, because he was a male model back in the 60s, they even sent a female over to his hotel room to see what he would do. So that's what went on back in show business at the time. Obviously, the times have changed today. But, well, maybe. But eventually, George, like almost like the gig was up. He just kept, redoubling down on this lie. And he pulled the director aside, Peter Hunt, and he said, "Peter, I'm not an actor." And Peter's like, starts belly laughing, and he says, and then George is like, "What?" And he's like, "You just fooled two of the most ruthless producers in all of show business." He's like, "Stick to your story, kid, and I'll make you the next James Bond." And that's how George Lazenby, you guys can like literally take that into your lives. He was just told no, and he just decided to not listen to a no and worked his way right into James Bond. So pretty fascinating story. So next time you're watching the film, he's criticized for not being an actor, but remember that he wasn't an actor, and he became James Bond. There's more people on the moon that have gone to the moon than have played James Bond, and he's one of them. And recently, I just got back from 2 weeks in Portugal all the way to Switzerland on the 50th anniversary tour of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and with George Lazenby. So I've hung out with George, and he's still the womanizer person from the 60s in 2019 right now. He's stuck in the 60s. So he's quite the character, and love him or hate him, he played James Bond. And next time you're watching the film, just remember that, guys. What do you guys think of it, Majesties?
Matt?
You know what? I think time has helped this movie. I think at the time, the controversy of the casting, even sort of the attitude he had towards the role, made it so that people had a predetermined idea of how he performed in the movie. I think he's actually great in the movie. He's playing a fresh-faced version of the character. And for modern audiences, I don't think it's as important as it was at the time. That, oh, it's not Sean Connery. People don't care. It's just a movie. It's James Bond. They don't care. There's been like 4 other guys that have played the part. And I think it helps because he's so innocent in the movie compared to Sean Connery. He's more stoic, especially near the end of his tenure in the role. I think it makes the character more believable. He's closer to Fleming. He's probably the second closest actor to portray the character that's as close to Fleming, and I think it helps. Edgar.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a wonderful film. It's a wonderful picture. Much like Jeff said, give this movie a chance. There's really a lot of quality about it, and specifically George Lazenby. Further to your point, his youthfulness does inject a certain vulnerability to the role, which is maybe, notwithstanding Daniel Craig, is something you might not expect from your James Bond film. So it does have a very, very special quality about it. I like it too.
Yeah, not easy shoes being 29 years old and taking over from Sean Connery after the 60s, James Bond bonanza.
Oh, absolutely. Right? Big shoes to fill in more ways than one.
Now, all of this talking about traveling to his glory and the skiing, I want to go somewhere else. I want to visits somewhere that no man has gone before. Let's go to space.
You want to go to space?
And let's go to space.
All right, it'll be my pleasure to take this crowd around the world one more time. We're going to 1979 and Moonraker. Now, what's the fuss about Moonraker when this one is brought up? Well, it's the one where they send James Bond to space. It doesn't make any sense. It's ridiculous. How can you take that movie seriously? You're not really supposed to take Moonraker maybe too seriously, but that's another discussion. That's for next year's panel. Essentially, yeah, it's true. The last, let's say 20, 25 minutes takes place in outer space. I would bring up 3 critical points to defend that section. Number one, it's 1979. A couple years earlier, moderate box office hit, Star Wars. Has anybody heard? You're Star Wars characters, right? No, I'm joking. So essentially, moderate box office hit. May have been a few people cosplaying as Star Wars characters here since Friday. And look, the Bond producers, they're not blind like any other producers. What comes out after Star Wars? Alien, Star Trek, the motion picture. Black Hole, I believe, is one of them that really piggybacked off of the success of Star Wars. The James Bond producer said, look, the next movie, we thought it was going to be a slightly more grounded one. Scratch that. Change everything. We're going to outer space. So, and to their credit, I was looking at the numbers, and, you do have to adjust it to inflation. I'm no mathematician. You can just Google the currency inflator. This thing made close to $750 million in 2019
That's a lot of coconuts.
Like, the people enjoyed this one. They ate it up. And lastly, so we got the fact that, they're riding a wave. They made a gamble. It paid off in spades and then some. And with respect to the sequence itself, there are a fair number of people in the room that have seen Moonraker. I mean, let's be frank, as wonderful as the special effects in Star Wars, and they are, as wonderful as the special effects in the motion picture, and they're fantastic, man, the stuff they're doing in Moonraker is kind of insane. Just the way that the model work, the miniature work by a fellow named Derek Meddings, and the painstaking process to bring that sequence to life. They would use the same film strip, add a little astronaut or add a little beam or a shuttle. Then they'd have to rewind it, add something else, obviously being very careful that those images would not crisscross to make it look completely ridiculous. Otherwise, the whole effort was for naught. So very laborious, very painstaking. But if you watch the movie, especially those final 20 minutes, the money's on the screen, guys. The money is on the screen. So I think it's a very fun sequence. It's a very impressive sequence technically. So at the end of the day, it's a positive for Moonraker. What do you guys think, Jeff?
Yeah, business-wise, I think it's very fascinating because at the end of The Spy Who Loved Me, it says James Bond will return in For Your Eyes Only. But then obviously Star Wars takes off in 77 and they change that. There's no internet, so they just whatever, we'll put out Moonraker. But I'm a big YouTube fan, and when there's a viral video, you kind of copy off of that somewhat. So it's pretty interesting to see the Bond producers are riding the waves. But definitely it's an interesting movie. Obviously, everybody knows it for outer space, but it's really only the end chapter of the movie that he goes to outer space. It's quite the spy movie before that, and there's a few interesting very dangerous type scenes where the Dobermans are killing Corinne de Feur outside of Vaux-de-Vacamp in France there, which was Hugo Drax's chateau. And it's kind of really ruthless. They try to kill Bond in a centrifuge, and poor Roger Moore is getting whipped around in this thing. And there's some really creepy scenes with Jaws walking through an alley in Rio, where it's just really kind of weird. But then there's all these fun little back to Roger Moore's antics going on in this movie. So it kind of weirdly mixes that into it. What do you think, Mathieu?
I think this movie has one of the best villains in the entire franchise. Mm-hmm. I love Michael Lonsdale as Hugo Drax. I can't do him justice, but please, Edgar, can you do a line just for me?
Now we're in trouble. James Bond, you return with the tedious inevitability of an unloved season. Beautiful dialogue, and he's great in it.
He's great. It's deadpan humor. It's awesome. I love him. And this movie has probably, to this day, the best opening sequence stunt. The fall from the plane without a parachute. To me, it's
Yeah, Tom Cruise, eat your heart out, right?
Yeah. Honestly,
that's right.
it is. Okay, it's probably not Roger Moore that did the stunts, but still, it's a captivating
Movie magic.
sequence with the
Movie
music, the John Barry music. Who's back after missing The Spy Who Loved Me? It's really like just for that sequence, you can't put this movie in the worst pile. It belongs somewhere else. I don't know where, but it's great action sequence.
Yeah, I mean, Moonraker is a lot of fun, space, lasers, skydiving. Jaws goes from being a baddie to a goodie. However, when it comes to the James Bond movies, it's not always fun and games. In fact, we get down and dirty sometimes in the James Bond movies, which will bring us to 1989's License to Kill. Now, Matt, I know this is your movie, but like, you can't bring your kids to it. It's so violent. What's going on in License to Kill? Explain.
Dalton is dangerous. This movie, has had another name before it came out. It was supposed to be named License Revoked, but they changed it because apparently us North Americans would think it's a comedy, probably a sequel to License to Drive. That came out the summer before, even the same summer.
I was very disappointed when that sequel never came.
Yeah. So they changed the title. That's one of the controversy. Also, it is more violent than the previous Bond movies. It's a little bit rougher, but to its credit, a lot of the sequences that are considered more violent happen in other films, other previous Bond films. Somebody got fed to a shark in a Thunderball. Phoenix Lighter gets fed to a shark in this movie. Somebody gets turned into a balloon and explodes. That also happens. Well, it's a little bit more bloody and violent. But, it's a Bond movie. It's a movie about a spy. There's going to be violence and murder. But that's part of the reason why it has a bad reputation. Also, its box office numbers are horrendous, miserable. And that movie is probably the lowest grossing Bond movie even to this day. But it was the summer of 1989. If you were around in 1989, and if you weren't, I'll teach you something. That's the summer of Batman, of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Lethal Weapon 2, Ghostbusters 2. But Ghostbusters 2 and Star Trek 5, both of these movies, which are big franchises that are still going to this day, all of them underperform. And License to Kill was a victim of the box office competition. But to its credit, it has great action sequence. The oil tanker chase at the end is great, where the trucks do wheelies. I love that sequence.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. It has also Dalton, who's a lot tougher in the role, a little bit more grim and gritty, and he's the last Bond to ever smoke on screen. I always love to say that because to me it feels cigarettes. Like
we're not condoning cigarettes.
No, but it
Still
feels right for the character. And he's closer to Fleming. And there's a lot of Fleming material in this movie that they recycled from a few of the short stories. And it has one of my favorite villains, Fran Sanchez, played by Robert Davi. He's great. He's not your typical world-conquering, maniacal supervillain. He's not a Captain Industry looking to create a monopoly of gold or microchips. He's just a guy, a businessman, basically. Just his business is a little bit criminal. He just wants to sell his drugs. He wants to sell cocaine. So, and also it has probably the first time, and I don't think they've ever done that in the entire franchise. Bond chooses a girl. Usually one of them ends up being either a villain or dying halfway through the movie. In this movie, at the end of the movie, he has the let's say more ravenous femme fatale in the presence of Lupe, and he has the tougher Bond chick that he ends up leaping for at the end of the movie. So that's one of the first times. And also this movie has an Academy Award henchman played by Benicio del Toro, plays Dario. He's so amazing. Just his delivery of the we're gonna give her a nice honeymoon. It's just weird. It's funny. So what do you guys think about License to Kill? Do you think it's as controversial as people say?
If you compare it to other entries in the franchise, I'm almost forced to say yes, but in a funny way, that's what makes it so special. That's why it's such an important and a beautiful entry in the franchise as well, because it's so different. Like, yeah, there are gadgets, but there's also somebody who gets sent into a little air compressor, and so that doesn't happen in any of the other movies. So yeah, there is that bit of a slightly more violent streak. What I always find fascinating whenever I watch the movie is that I find it's very much tailored to Timothy Dalton, the actor himself, a very Shakespearean trained actor, very emotional. He likes character, he likes grit, and that's clearly reflected on the screen. So I think it's a great movie. There are tons of qualities about it, but I think Timothy Dalton's presence and his performance is always what strikes me the most when I watch that one. Jeff?
Yeah, it's a badass movie. It's a good one to like blare the Michael Kamen soundtrack to on a Friday night or something like that. Now, Jean, who's on stage here, and I just had dinner on top of Pete's Gloria with the director John Glenn, and John Glenn did 5 Bond directing movies for Bond in the 80s, and this is his favorite movie. So and you guys were kind of like talking about a bit. Very Ian Fleming. This script was written for Dalton, where The Living Daylights was a little tailored a little bit for Roger Moore, and they had to like quickly switch it over to Dalton. This was totally Dalton by Richard Maybaum and Michael G. Wilson writing it for him. So badass movie. And I believe it was the times, guys, the 80s action movies like Terminator, like Rambo, like Scarface,
Predator.
All these things were violent.
Lethal Weapon.
You don't even see good rated R movies anymore. This was like... It was almost rated R.
It's the first PG-13 Bond.
Yeah, so
it's quite notorious for that also. But all this talk about
James Bond?
past James Bond movies, there's another one we haven't talking about. What's the one, Jeff? What's the one we're going to finish this? Oh, hey there! I didn't see you. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed part 1. There's a part 2. You have to go on our YouTube page. But before you do that, make sure to like and subscribe James Bond Canada. Jeff was a great guy, fun to hang around. We also had a great time, and you get to see a little bit more of Jean Goyette from James Bond Club France in the second part 2, which will be on our YouTube page. I suggest that you like and subscribe this one, and then head to the James Bond Complex to have the entire experience of the Montreal James Bond panel that we did last month. So hope you like this one, like the other one, and we'll see you on the internet. Bye-bye.